Oh, thank you, Vanessa, and thank to GEFI and to all of you in the room today. This session, by the way, is a question time session, so I am anticipating that most of the questions are going to come from the floor, but I'm going to get this going just with some short remarks and some introductions and maybe a couple of questions of my own, if I may. You know, I think Vanessa was right. The finance industry and the responsible finance industry has rightly focused on climate as being an absolute priority, because if we don't solve this, then the very climate on which our civilizations and on which our financial systems rest is under threat. But when it was actually UNEP-FI before my day that put together the ESG thing, the social aspect of this was an important thing. And indeed, historically, the social aspect came before the environmental aspect. Now, those of you who are old enough may remember that the ethical funds were the ones that would never invest in booze, bombs, or baccy. But today, on social issues, we now just have this huge, long list of things that people are asking about. Diversity, but what sort of diversity? Who, where, on what boards? How do you know that it's real? How Satya Tripathi saying, you know, this needs to be something better than just a showcase. What about looking after the workforce, health and safety, pay, terms and conditions? What about product safety? And by that I don't mean just that things explode in your face. What sort of food should you be selling or encouraging children to eat, for example? Data protection, lobbying, animal welfare, fashion, the circular economy, for example. What is it that we ought to be doing about that? Supply chain. Are you clear that you're not trading with countries that you ought not to be trading with? Are you clear that there's no slavery in the supply chain? And I could go on. And these, by the way, are all issues that I'm sure the progressive amongst you in this audience will be saying, well, they all sound like good things. But what about people that might be more conservative? Someone that says, by the ways, I don't want to fund or finance anyone who's got anything to do with abortion. How is it that you would deal with that as being a social issue? And how, against this huge, big, long issue of social issues, do you take account of, I think, what John Kay was trying to say, which is that, look, if you're running a business, a pharmaceutical business, it's in the very nature of the business that you're running that you've understood what the social purpose of that business is. So lots and lots of questions here that we can address. And I have really a wonderfully diverse three panelists to do this with me. So I'm just going to sort of introduce them and ask them a couple of questions. But I'm going to start with you, Liz Houston from MSCI. Now, MSCI describes itself as the leading provider of critical decision support services for the global investment community. And you've started your life, I think, looking at the luxury goods industry, Liz, which is a bit different. But now on the ESG research team at MSCI. So lots of the data that fund managers are using is produced, I would guess, by your team. Is that right? What does it do, the research team?
So the research team, the ESG and climate research team that I'm lucky enough to work in, we're not gathering the data ourselves. We have colleagues in separate teams that do that. We're very lucky in that we're the ones that get to play in the data playground all day. So what we're doing is using the data that's been gathered by our colleagues to be able to build it into an ESG ratings model, or run analyses on industries to see how we think they are faring on some of the different major thematics across responsible investing. So yeah, that's how I spend my days, and I thank myself that I'm so lucky. So
you're kind of, in a way, for the companies out there that people are investing in, you're almost like the referee that's deciding whether or not they're in Division 1 or Division 2. In terms of their performance?
Well, we have a very set methodology.
Yeah.
And so I would say that it's the companies themselves that get to decide whether they're in Division 1 or Division 2, rather than us.
Very good reply. Yes, indeed. So that's Liz. And then I've got Charles Haresnape. Now, Charles, you're CEO of Gatehouse Bank, which is an Islamic bank. I wonder, just before I go any further, could you just explain to people just a little bit about Islamic finance? I mean, is this some small niche, or what is it and what does it do?
Well, I mean, we're Gatehouse Bank is a Sharia-compliant Islamic finance institution. Just to give you some context, we are UK registered. We're not overseas registered. We're a full bank with a full banking license, but we are Sharia compliant. The obviously worldwide, Islamic finance is huge. I mean, it's hundreds of billions worldwide. In the UK, it's a lot smaller, but the UK is the single biggest provider of Islamic finance in Europe, at least, certainly outside the non-Muslim countries. But the key point really is that the principles that we operate by underpin a lot of what ESG is supposed to do anyway. Actually, it's certainly the S. So it's about fairness, it's about openness, it's about community, it's about all those good things that we'll talk more about. So we do that. We're fairly small. We're the fastest growing Sharia compliant challenger bank in the UK. There's only about 4 of us, but we're the fastest growing one. So I thought I'd just kind of get that in while I was here.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure if we're in Division 1 or Division 2, actually. But
and you describe yourself as sort of socially responsible, ethical, fair, trying to do business the right way. I mean, that just feels like ESG, doesn't it? But you're saying that's sort of built into the DNA.
Well, it's the underlying philosophy of Islamic finance. Yeah. So, and the principles. So obviously we're not into the deep religion of it, but the principles have been formed through the religious background of Islamic finance. So yeah, it's very hard to always be perfect at everything. Yeah. But we try really hard on key principles through everything we do to demonstrate that we are socially responsible. So, for example, we have proof points whereby we do not lend into sectors that we believe and other people in the Islamic industry believe are harmful. Yeah. So we don't supply any finance to gambling. We don't supply any finance to alcohol-related manufacturers, distributors. We don't do anything in regard to the sex industry or anything like that. Yeah. So there are certain key things that we don't do, and we do lots of things that we try and add value to.
And I should tell the audience, in case they're not Muslim, that you will accept deposits from everybody, I understand.
Yeah, well, Shokara, I'm not a Muslim. I just thought I'd put it out there, because I could be, but I'm not. And I really like our savings products. Okay. And I can definitely have one. You can have one. You can have one. You can have one. Anyone can have one. Our rates are really, really good.
Right, advertising stops there. Yeah, that's it. That's enough. And now, look, look, I've got MSCI, big in global investment information provider. I've got an Islamic bank from a major global tradition, but leading here in the UK. And then I've got Modupe Ladipo from Nigeria. And you started off in pretty mainstream finance, but you've spent the last however many years promoting financial inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing, to what that means, the promotion of financial inclusion, and why it's important?
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. So as you know, 2 billion people in the world don't have access to a bank account, do not own a bank account, do not use a bank account. So if I look in the room now and I say, is there anybody here that doesn't have a bank account? Anybody? 100%. In Nigeria, for instance, currently there are only 45% of the adult population that has a bank account. So we still have a long way to go, but when we think about where we started from in 2008, when DFID set up EFINA, we were at 21%. So over the last 15 years or so, 16 years, we have doubled the figure of the amount of people that are in the banking sector. It is important because they then get to do lots of things that we do with our bank account that we take for granted. Having an account, everybody takes for granted. From the age of 15, 16, we all have accounts and we get on with it. But they do have access to money. and their money is put in informal channels. That doesn't benefit anybody, including the formal banking sector. So we have to think about ways of encouraging them to come into the formal environment. And we did that in a number of ways. So I think initially people think S, financial inclusion, they're thinking, oh, it's non-profit, it's charitable, it's this, it's that, but it isn't. We worked with the banks, a lot of the insurance companies, the pension funds, to come up with products and services that are aimed at the low-income segment, but to do so profitably, because that is the only way it's going to be sustainable. So wherever possible, we use stick, sometimes we use carrot, sometimes pleading, sometimes cajoling, sometimes whipping. We try the whole gamut of things to get people, the regulators, to do what they should do, and for people to come back to use the account. And also you have to have a feedback loop to understand what's working and what isn't. So now we're happy to say we have many different rules around, you know, how you can open an account, know your customer, because initially a lot of people complain that the amount of money it costs the bank to go and find where your customer is, to do all that customer KYC was very expensive. So for instance, in Nigeria, we started a tiered KYC process where, you know, at the lower bottom, Tier 1, all you need is a mobile phone, which everybody has, and your name, and you can open an account, but you can only transact up to a certain amount. Then the upper tier, more CDDs done, and higher.
And it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that just have, I mean, I'm thinking back to John Kay, and just not having financial services is a huge loss in terms of people's prosperity, just the ability to provide that. And I'm reminded that, as far as I know, the only business person to have won the Nobel Peace Prize was a banker, which was Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, who loaned money to poor women and took tens of thousands of people out of poverty. He did what Wonga used to do in this country, but did it with purpose. And I guess that's what you're trying to achieve.
We're trying to achieve different things. Businesses get better access to finance.
Yeah.
The bottom of the pyramid have better access to a range of financial products, not just an account. A lot of them have a lot of issues that, you know, they're working in the market, fire, they don't have insurance, pension, they rely on their children, many different things that we just all take for granted. But now, thankfully, we have micro pensions. It was interesting when we're trying to introduce pensions. They said, can we get our money when we want? No, we're not interested.
So
the money can go up or down.
And in a sense,
we're not interested.
I mean, the core bit of your S in the social mission is to be able to make sure that people have got basic financial services and that they're treated fairly in doing that. I wonder...
Equity and inclusion.
Yeah, if I was to talk to a Lizard Trust, are there other particular social things that you think are top of people's minds, either as investors from MSCI or as your customers at the bank?
Sure. So I do think it's fair to say that for the last kind of 5 or so years, the focus from a lot of our clients has very much been on climate, understandably. As I like to remind our climate colleagues, though, the reason we care about the environment on this planet is because it's where all the people live. So all E is S is my line. Anyway. What we're seeing now is, I think, a big resurgence in interest in S, particularly around some key flashpoints like the just transition. We've seen that mentioned a couple of times today. So whether that be the impact on labour markets of the transition to a green economy, or the human rights impact of the sourcing of critical minerals. Equally, adaptation is a big flashpoint at the moment. So I know that my colleagues in climate are currently working on the impact on labour productivity of various wet bulb temperatures. And if that's not the stuff of nightmares, I don't know what is.
Yeah, but a lot of that feels like it's social issues that are deriving from environmental issues. For example, sort of new energies and building dams and making sure that human rights are respected when you do that. Is that fair, or is it broader than that?
I think it's broader than that, and I think there's also an understanding that as physical risk gets real, it's the impact on people that is coming to the forefront. So that might be, for example, what do households do when they can't insure their home anymore because the insurance have left the market?
Right.
Or it might be, it could be, what are the impacts on social risk from increased migration as we get, a changing climate, because we know migrants are more at risk to forced labour and other social harms.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that, yes, this is a systems thinking point. From a regulatory perspective as well, I think one of the reasons...
And also I think it's wrong to see E and S as being two separate things. Indeed, the whole notion of the just transition is that if you don't have these together, then that isn't going to work, I guess. But Charles, do you see in the bank, are there particular social issues that are...
I mean, yeah, there's lots. I mean, feedback from customers, from our colleagues. There's a lot. And in the UK, obviously, we focus on the UK, what benefits are there that we can help with in the UK. And the things that often come to the fore are housing, poor quality housing, not enough housing. So kind of what can we do to facilitate that best? So in our particular case, we do home finance, we do savings like we described before. But a third of the revenue of the bank actually is from partnering with UK PLC builders, bringing inward investment into the UK, and we manage the building of new homes in funds. Those are brand new homes, often in regeneration areas around the UK. Unfortunately, none yet in Scotland, but that's hopefully to come. But the point is that it brings new stock. It's very energy efficient because it's brand new.
Yeah.
We have a big kind of test about what the builders are doing to build the houses, what materials are they using. So that's a social benefit. And actually that chimes really well with kind of our values. Yeah. But I mean, the last thing I would say generally on this is that the S, we see, I wish it was a C actually, because culture underpins everything. So if your culture is good or can get better in your organisation, your managers, your staff, it tends to rub off spookily on your customers because they're doing the right things and the behaviours are better. So we spend a lot of time trying to improve the culture of the organisation to be fit for the purpose of our customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, let me take this one gentleman here, sort of third row back. And are there any others? I could take a couple. And, yes, a gentleman over in that corner as well. Let me start here. And we do need to make sure as well that we've got a lovely balance of men and women in this audience, that the questioning reflects that as well.
I'm interested in how the S plays a role in the financial decision making. I mean, when you think of a positive social change created by a financial decision, whatever it is, it's assessed by subjective norms and values. And you may have some metrics associated with it. When you look at the financial logic, it gives you a very clear set of numbers, risk and return. I mean, do you trade these off? A good social outcome versus a good financial outcome? Or one goes up, the other goes down? I mean, what's the relationship between them? How do you do it?
Okay, so the trade-off of social... Let me take the question here if we've got the mic there. If not, let me just... I'll give that to you first, Charles.
Yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, so obviously, we're here to make a profit at the end of the day because that keeps the wheels moving and means we can grow and do more stuff. So the financial measures are very clear, like you say, and our board and our shareholders are really keen on all that kind of stuff. But also, we set standards, goals around cultural activity, behaviour, hence the social connection. So we independently audit ourselves in terms of how our staff feel, how our customers feel as well. So there's measures around that. What's our engagement scores? How many customers do we engage with? What's the level of positivity around what we're doing? So you can measure things. I mean, it's not as detailed as the financial measures, but clearly any scorecard should have a mixture of the two. The big dilemma is what's the proportion between the two? And increasingly over the last few years, the kind of social aspects and the cultural aspects have grown as a proportion. So now when we look at our staff rewards, incentives, we generally look at 50-50. That would be my answer to that.
Does that address your question? Okay. Well, yeah.
Sure.
Liz,
sure. I mean, I think I would kind of bring it back to what Modupe's been discussing this afternoon. So within our ratings model, we do have a section of it where we look at, within the social opportunities pillar, access to finance. So we will assess financial services companies on how well we think they are making the most of capturing the profitable benefits of offering access to finance. So it's that dual aspect that kind of a company can say that they are they are operating with purpose, but it's when that profit goes alongside it that we see a real benefit.
Yeah.
So in Nigeria, most of the banks, unfortunately, tend to be very short-term focused. So for them, then the emphasis is more on the profit because that's what their shareholders want to see, and they're not able to do, stuff more long-term because if one or two of them were doing that and other banks were reporting large sums of profit, then their shareholders would get upset. So they don't really, profit comes first at the moment, and then other nice to haves are sort of stated as, aren't they doing well because they're in financial inclusion and they have good, range of customers, etc. But profit is their first motive for now.
So, question over here.
Yeah, Mike, it's Kevin Parker from ZN. My question was actually partly answered by the first one. It's this: to what extent can we quantify the S? We can quantify the E reasonably well in tons of carbon. I was struck by the statistic about 2 billion people not having access to banking. To what extent can we quantify our S efforts, our social efforts, and to what extent can we contextualize those? We've helped this number of people, which, by the way, is 5 or 10 or 15% of the total people in the whole country affected by this. Is that feasible? Is it possible?
It is possible, so that's what each country's context will be different. So in Nigeria, for example, we have a national financial inclusion strategy, and we have some targets in there. So there are targets around youth, women, targets around channels, targets around exclusion levels, right? So we didn't meet those targets within the time frame that we set. However, we have that general progress as to what we need to do. So as part of that, they ask all the financial service participants to send in their updates every month to see where we need to move, what we need to change, how we need to move forward. So those are the things that you can do. So there are possible metrics, and we do independent research, both supply and demand, on a regular basis.
And Liz, I guess what you're doing is to try and find what are the appropriate metrics of that nature.
Yes, so I think, as you stated at the beginning,
Yeah.
S can mean a whole load of different things.
Yeah.
And so carbon can be quite deceptive in its
Yeah.
simplicity, and we all get distracted by it. I think with S, you have to be really specific what question you're asking, and then figure out what quantifiable assessment you can make to go alongside it. So,
And then there's zillions of different S's, though, aren't there? Doesn't it become a wee bit, if you try and get all of them, it's like trying to pin the mercury down in the tray.
yes, but I would flip that back and say on the E side as well, we don't always expect companies to do well on all aspects of carbon, because there are multiple ways of looking at carbon and biodiversity and water and pollution at the same time. So to ask a company to do all of S at the same time, I think is a little unfair as well.
Charles?
But yeah, when you look at, we're one of several organisations that were founder members of the UN Principles of Responsible Banking. So we were in at the ground floor, which was great because then we could learn off other bigger institutions what they were up to and pick the best bits out. But the key thing we found was by going through that process, we were able to identify within the UK what seemed to be the most pressing social issues that we felt we could assist with. And I'll give you an example. One example was there's not enough green spaces or greenness in the UK. Now that might sound like E, but it's got a big social context as well. So people were saying in lots of the UK is very, very lower density of greenery compared to the rest of Europe, for example. So how can we do that? So something as simple as planting trees within a product suite. So if you're a product, you buy a product, for example, we will plant a tree, we'll tell you where it is, and you get the carbon credit, not us. So that, that's putting the E and the S a little bit together. That's what
Yeah.
people feedback is. They want those things.
And also there are certain things that you're focusing on, housing and then...
But you can only focus on key things. So you know, we're a smaller organisation,
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
can't do everything.
So there's quite a big...
What's in our gift that we can do something towards that's key. So we're actually doing something. We're not talking about it. We're doing something.
Yeah.
And as we get bigger, hopefully, we can do even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to do, Atul has just grabbed the microphone, so we'll do him next. And then there's a woman 4 rows back there, and then there was a gentleman over in that corner there. And everybody else, if you just put your hands up, I'll come to you. But let me do those 3.
Thank you, David.
Atul.
Atul Shah, City University. I'm really concerned about the S becoming a problem, because if you take out a currency note, all it is a social construct and a social contract. So when we say S is a problem, the real issue is that our financial system is the problem. We have completely lost connection with the grassroots of money, with communities, with trust, with relationships. By the way, trust is not a chapter in any finance textbook today. We've just created a whole technology about talking about finance. And it kind of relates to also these morning sessions as well, that because we have forgotten the S, that's why we got all the other cracks going on. And Modupe also spoke yesterday very nicely about the ground in Nigeria and how people deal with money in the communities, in the local context. So we really need to, that's the question. Do you agree that the system is the problem?
Yeah, okay. So is the system the problem? Let me take 2 or 3 questions, though, because we'll get through more of them. So the woman behind you.
Thanks. My question links to the social benefit, or as you described, Liz, the social opportunity. How do you, so there's 2 parts to this, but how do you identify a social opportunity, and how important is the local level? And the other part is what needs to happen to connect the E and the S and the G? Are there models out there that are good examples? Thanks very much.
Let me take those 2 questions. So the first one, is it the system that's the problem, in the sense that if we lack trust, then the financial system just falls away?
Well, yeah, correct.
I mean,
that's a given, isn't it? But I mean, my view, and it's only my personal view, is it's not the financial system, it's the way we've handled it in parts at certain times. So the financial system generally has, grown the world economy, it's grown people's standards of living, it's the biggest, certainly in the UK, I think it's 70% of GDP. So, we can't knock it on one side lightly. There's been some massive issues that have gone wrong. And we like to hope we learn from those things, financial crash, other cryptocurrency type situations. So it does go off track, but generally speaking, I think we need a good financial system for inclusion, for everything else. Our job is to make sure those things don't happen and have a degree of responsibility about how we operate the financial system. And I think increasingly, most stakeholders are trying to do that quite fervently. So it's about social responsibility, which starts from the very top of all the organisations. And in the past, I think we've seen that go wrong. But, we need to keep real focus on what is the culture in the organisations, the responsibility, and how they deploy finance needs to be more socially responsible. So I don't think it's broken. It's just a question of how we keep on track.
Yeah, I'm also struck, Charles, just to push a little bit on that, but the degree to which the early development of the financial systems in Europe were closely associated with religious groups and with the trust that you would have between, the first savings bank was a Scottish minister, the first pension fund was Scottish ministers. I'm the son of a Scottish minister, so I like being able to tell people.
Never would have guessed.
But you could see, the religion was and that still remains the case in Islamic countries, but seems to have sort of lost itself. And that religious basis actually creates some of the trust that is necessary for the financial system to work.
Well, I think, yeah, it probably does in a number of countries and continents. I'm sure that's absolutely right. I mean, we are where we are. Certainly in the UK and Europe, it's quite diverse. And therefore, how can we utilise some of those good principles that we see practised elsewhere? In finance, I'm not talking about religion generally, but the financial application of those principles, how can we make that apply certainly in this country? And that's what we're trying to do, really.
Yeah.
So you can't go back. It's like with the financial system. What are you going to have if you don't have a financial system? You can't bin it. You've got to have an ongoing way of thinking about it in a very responsible way. I think that's more the case nowadays because, well, we always say we've learned from the past, but we never seem to, actually. But we try to.
Yeah. And then, Modupe, the question about finding social opportunities and the connection between ESG, how does that work?
I want to just sort of say something quickly about the financial system not working. I think globally it's not very inclusive. So a lot of work needs to be done to engender trust. Trust is the very first sort of part of any relationship, to be honest. And I think that trust has been broken across many continents. For me, that's what I think. So to go back to deciding what you want to focus on, I mean, there, like you said, there's a gamut of social issues, and you have to pick the one that speaks most to you, whether it's inclusion, whether it's gender, whether it's diversity, and then you start to develop what is important to you as an organization, what does your organization stand for, and how are you going to then implement those particular metrics. In terms of the environment, I know we've talked about it extensively yesterday and today, and I keep saying that we're all at a different stage. The things that are important to the grassroots, even though they're impacted by environment, just is not about environment. They don't know anything about carbon, they don't know anything about footprint, whether this is global warming. They're concerned about where they're going to get their next meal, whether they have a roof over their head, having some dignity in their lives. So these are the things that sometimes when we get stuck on the E or the G, the S gets left behind. And then the E's and the G's don't get implemented because what you really need to get those two done properly is a mass of S. So we really need to think about the sequencing of some of these things and how do we get people to understand some of these issues that we're discussing. Because I can imagine if I went to the grassroots and told them that we're thinking about some carbon thing, they'll think maybe I've gone nuts. They don't really understand what I'm talking about. So there'll be no interest. So we just need to think about language, audience, stakeholders, and how we convey the messages that we're thinking about. One size doesn't fit all.
Let me do another round of questions. I think we might get a couple in before we finish. So there was somebody, the gentleman in the jacket over it. No, that's all right. In which case, to the woman in the row here, and there were other people put their hands up. Just keep putting your hands up, and I'll see you, and then I'll know when we get the next round. Yeah.
Hi. It's Gemma from the Scottish National Investment Bank. I was really taken by what Satya said this morning about we can't negotiate with the laws of physics, and actually I think he used the word disintegrating in terms of the environment. But then I was really taken with what you said, Liz, about the S and the E and the sort of same thing, and then the way that you talked about like wet bulb temperatures and you know, like really embedding that materiality of the risks and you know, on one sense it's absurd to think about like productivity in terms of wet bulb temperatures because you're thinking about actual survivability when you're getting into that sort of stuff. So I agree, it's very terrifying. So just to bring those two threads together, like thinking about the, you know, the crisis that we've had of, you know, in the UK with the cost of living crisis and obviously across the world, how do we bring the S and the E together in with a sense of urgency of what we need to do? So I just wondered from you know, especially Liz and Modupe's, you know, how do you get that sense of urgency? Like, how do you fight for the S and sort of make it more urgent and make the action come faster so we can prevent the worst of the E, I suppose?
Yeah, Liz, let me start with you on that one.
I think, for once, the regulators have been doing a little bit to help with this. So it's not really one for changing hearts and minds, but just the basics, like having the minimum safeguards on human rights in the EU taxonomy, or you know, we've had the task force for nature disclosures guidelines today, and that includes an element on community relations and making sure that you're not destroying communities, as you know, in your reporting frameworks as well. So it's slightly dry, but I'm with the regulators on this one. I think there's limits to what you can persuade people to do through voluntary action, and you kind of need the stick there.
And Liz, what about organisation? You know, you've got the Business and Human Rights Resource Centre that sort of reports back on, particularly on companies that are doing green projects where they haven't thought about the community relations before they do it. Does that play an important part in all of this, or organisations like them play an important part in all of this?
100%, yes. So there's there's what companies are saying,
yeah,
and then there's what civil society is saying that companies are doing.
Yeah.
And the two don't often match, and it's very important that we have that kind of those groups that are keeping everyone honest and bringing those issues to the forefront.
And in a sense, you, like the newspaper of record, are able to say to investors, look, this is best judgment on what this company is up to.
Well, you'll be surprised to learn that we have an entire product devoted to this, which I could talk about for hours, but won't.
Okay.
It's very dull.
No, okay.
But yes, so
Charles is the only person that gets to advertise. Yeah.
but yes, that's what we do for our clients.
Great. And that question at the back of the room?
Hello, Kate McAlpine here. Vested interest, I work in social development and not finance. But I'm interested in your framing of the S around a sort of pick box of issues, rather than looking at a social value. And I'm just interested, what appetite is there within the sector to either forecast or evidence the social value created by investments, rather than seeing, as you said earlier, an add-on that we can potentially do if we're making a profit?
What a really interesting question. Yeah, Charles.
Well, yeah, so it's a good question. We definitely can. I can only speak in my area. We definitely can validate and evidence the social benefit that we're trying to achieve from the activity that we do. I've given two examples already where you can actually measure them. So, you know, something as simple as how many trees can you plant? What carbon offset do they produce? What carbon do they absorb? So we can measure that. We have it independently audited. It goes in our annual accounts. So there's no hiding place for that. You can't just say we'll do our best and do nothing. If you look at the houses that we build in partnership, we have to say what the carbon emissions are from those houses. It's audited. Everything's audited in terms of, you know, the carbon and therefore the social benefit from that. So, you know, how many people live in these new houses? Where were they living before? What's the social benefit of that? We do measure that, and we're quite small, so you can measure it. But the key thing is, I think, is we measure what we get on and do with, rather than talking about global things and everything else, which are important. But really, if everyone sticks to the lane and can actually do something, it'll all add up to quite a lot. My view is there's a lot of pontificating about a lot of stuff still, and a limited number of activity going on generally. If you look at it globally, that's the reason why we're nowhere near the target we should be at the minute. It's because stuff's still being talked about in lots of places, and lots of research is being done. But where is the actual activity being done that's making a difference to social? So you can see examples here which are great, but I'm not convinced globally enough is being done. But the short answer to that question is yes, we can measure, we believe, the social benefit from the activities that we do. We design it, we measure it, and we can evidence in our annual reporting where we stacked up against that ambition. So that would be my response.
But Liz, is that, I mean, you know, a criticism of all the sort of measures we've got, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but you know, that we encourage people to hit the target but to miss the point. And the social value that is being delivered is different than hitting all of those targets. I mean, it's unlikely you'll create no social value if you don't hit some of those targets. But is there a danger of that? I mean, there must be, isn't there?
I would go back to an earlier point of yours, which is we can't bin the financial system that we have at the moment. We kind of have to work
We can try, but it'd be a mistake.
we kind of have to work with what we've got. So having data is no substitute for having social purpose. All we can do is allow investors to assess whether the companies they're investing in have that purpose or not.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the problem actually is on the investment side, is it depends if you're taking a short-term view of where you place investments, whether it's in, ecologically sound investment funds, sustainable funds, or your box standard funds that used to be there forever. And actually, I'll give you a very quick example. So my pension fund, I thought, well, I'm ancient, getting towards retirement. I better put some of it in a sustainable fund. Well, that's done lousy compared to oil and gas. So actually persuading people to, put more money into those sectors, you have to have people who can take a longer term view. People like us, it depends on your age, it's quite hard, and you end up with, if you're not careful, a bad experience. So those funds that you think are really doing the right thing, very sustainable, generally, I found, perform worse in the short term, because look at the price of oil. So therefore, the funds perform better.
Okay,
it's kind of circular thing.
That's a very good challenge, and we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Tom Kenrick, NatWest Group, and possibly setting up Sarah slightly here. I was just interested, obviously there's lots of conversation about OS is terribly complicated, there's lots of different things that you could look at. Same can be said of climate, and you've said that yourselves. You could look at water, you could look at biodiversity, but we all look at carbon. So what would be the single galvanizing, exciting target that we could set in social that would create the same kind of momentum and enthusiasm that the net zero has? So my suggestion is absolute zero slavery. That's my suggestion. Do you have suggestions?
So you're just being pragmatic, Tom, and you're saying if there's one thing we're going to do that would nail a big problem, zero slavery. What would you think about that for an idea? Modupe.
Well, it's got to be the goal. It's a no-brainer, that, isn't it? I mean, that's a given. There should be no slavery. I mean, well, no, we're not. We're only in our own shop. I mean, everyone's got an anti-slavery policy, clearly. But I mean, that's a broad principle that, a lot of people have got to work on, a lot of governments, a lot of everything else. Bringing people together, quite hard to do it, isn't it? I go back to Modupe's point. I think it's about, how can we bank everybody? If you in the financial context, how can we bank everybody, whether you've got £2 or £2 million? How can we do that across the world? Now, it's started, but I think it's got some way to go.
Mm-hmm. I think you've just offered each other a very interesting challenge, because Tom's from NatWest. Modupe, slavery.
I mean, people still have targets for those. We have targets. They still exist. Maybe not slavery, but childhood, child labor. So people sort of qualify that. But for me, it would always be, how do we get everybody to have a bank account? Who wants a bank account? Not everybody wants one, but anyone who wants one gets one. And the second thing I want to say about measurement is that sometimes we do the financial diaries. So we go into families, communities, understand what they're up to before and after they have a bank account. Not just even a bank account. It's a range of financial services that really would make them resilient, because the people who suffer the most from all this climate change that you're talking about are women, farmers, and how do we give them products that will make them more financially resilient when these climate changes happen. So that's where the thinking needs to happen about the right products and services aimed at these people, not just random, here we have it, this is what we give everybody, take it or leave it if it's relevant to you, or not. So we just need to do a lot more innovation in that area so that everybody is covered one way or the other.
Liz, slavery, just if you've got...
I mean, my background is researching retail and brand, so I'm with you. From a personal perspective, I'd be pushing for the zero forced labour. And I think there are quite a few groups who are looking at that, but it needs a PR push. So if there's any friendly PR agencies who want to push zero forced labour as the global goal, I'll support you on that.
It's NatWest policy now, you've heard it here.
So So look, I've run out of time. Look, I hope you enjoyed that. I don't think we've answered the question about what the S is, but I hope that we've raised a whole bunch of questions. I mean, right from what is the S of a bank in the first place? What is the nature of the trust and the social relations that are needed for finance to be able to thrive? And then as we have this complicated global system, how is it that we possibly stay in touch with the social performance of the companies in which all our money is invested, and how do we guide them towards doing the right thing? I have to say, I think I've just had the best panel because it is so broad in the things that it thinks about and the things that it does. And I'm sorry that there is no other way I can think to thank them except just to clap in the normal way.